A mighty struggle. As related earlier, Luang Pu returned to Luang Pu Ginaree's monastery before the beginning of the rains retreat and was soon presented with a new robe. He accelerated his meditation, keeping up his walking practice even if the sun was fierce or the rain was pouring down, until the center of his walking path was worn into a furrow. Luang Pu Ginaree, on the other hand, hardly walked at all. Sometimes he might be seen strolling up and down his meditation path 2 or 3 times, and then sitting down in a shady place to patch a piece of cloth or repair something broken. I assumed that he was getting nowhere. He didn't practice walking meditation. He never sat for very long. He would just potter around doing this and that the whole day. As for me, I thought, I hardly take a moment's rest, and I still haven't realized anything. If Luang Pu is practicing like this, what can he ever hope to achieve? I got it wrong. Luang Pu Ginaree knew far more than me. He seldom gave admonitions, and those he did were terse, but his words were always profound and full of a keen wisdom. Luang Pu summarized the important lesson he had learned. The scope of a teacher's vision far exceeds our own. It is the effort to eradicate the defilements within the mind that is the essence of practice. You can't judge the teacher by how much he sits and walks. During this rains retreat, sexual desire, a thrashing, pounding storm of it, returned to assail Luang Pu's body and mind. It blew up at a time when he was putting great efforts into his practice. One interpretation might be that such single-minded introspection brought repressed desires to the surface. The most usual way for the forest teachers to describe this phenomenon, however, is to personalize the defilements as tyrants who have held sway over the mind for countless lifetimes, and who, now seeing a threat to their hegemony, react violently with the most powerful forces at their disposal. Whatever the explanation, Luang Pu suddenly found himself in that hot, damp forest, engulfed in a realm of vaginas. Eyes open or closed, tens, hundreds of the hallucinatory images surrounded him, devastatingly real. The power of his lust was almost unbearable, as fierce as the fear he had felt in the cremation forest. There was nothing to do but grimly endure. Some explanation may be called for to make clear the full extent of Luang Pu's predicament. The Buddha taught that on the path to enlightenment, sexual desire can and eventually must be completely transcended. To this end, monks undertake an absolute form of celibacy in order to isolate and reveal the impermanent, unsatisfactory and impersonal nature of sexual desire, and thus uproot identification with it. The weight of the discipline is thrown behind this practice by making intentional emission of semen one of its most serious offences, a sanghadisesa. If committed, it necessitates a period of penance and rehabilitation that is deeply embarrassing to the transgressor. He has to, for instance, publicly confess his offence to the Sangha on every day of the penance, and it's inconvenient for the community of monks. Even if he stops short of masturbation, a monk who makes the slightest deliberate attempt to excite himself sexually or physically relieve sexual feelings commits an offence nonetheless, albeit of a less grave nature. He is given, therefore, absolutely no choice but to face up to the tension of lust. Until insight arises, a monk must be sustained by patient endurance, wise reflection, calmness of mind, and confidence in the value of struggling with such feelings. Luang Pu was in constant fear of ejaculation. During this period, he did not dare practice walking meditation. He was afraid that if the friction of his lower robe stimulated his penis too much, he would be unable to control himself. He asked a layman to make him a walking path deep in the forest, so that he could walk there at night time with his lower robe hitched up around his waist. It was a full 10 days before the alluring visions and the lust they engendered finally faded. Many years later, Luang Pu told his oldest friend Po Put, perhaps in jest and perhaps not, that the vaginas belonged to all his wives of previous existences. Whatever their origin, this episode was to prove the one last great hurrah of his sexual nature. Finding skillful means to deal with sexual desire is a major preoccupation for many young monks, and in later years, Luang Pu was to speak of this incident to his disciples on a number of occasions. He was keen for them to see that such feelings were natural and that they could be transcended with determination. He himself had survived the onslaught, not through an intimidating amount of concentration or dazzling wisdom, but a good old-fashioned, unromantic, teeth-gritting endurance. In 1968, when a first short biography of Luang Pu was being written, he insisted that his vagina hallucinations be included. The author, his disciple Ajahn Chah, was rather uneasy about how such frank revelations would go down with the general public. It was not the kind of material usually found in such books. Luang Pu said that if he omitted that passage, then he could just forget about the whole project. The rains retreat at Wat Pa Ban Nong He was not all blood and thunder grimness. On the contrary, one night as Luang Pu lay down to sleep, at the end of a long period of meditation, he was greeted by a vision of Luang Pu Man standing in front of him, holding out a glittering jewel. Luang Pu Man said, "Cha, I'm giving this to you. See how bright and radiant it is." Luang Pu sat up and stretched out his right hand to receive the jewel. At that moment, he woke up and found himself sitting on his mat, hand forming a fist, as if grasping something supremely precious. Luang Pu's spirits received a tremendous spur from that auspicious vision, and for the remainder of the retreat, he was fired by an unquenchable enthusiasm for practice. Luang Pu remained at Nong He until the hot season of the following year, 1949, when, under a searing sun, he resumed his wandering once more. But first, following the ancient tradition, he offered to Luang Pu Ginaree a tray of candles, incense, and toothwoods that he had made himself from the astringent ko ta tree, and asked forgiveness for any faults he might have knowingly or unknowingly committed during his stay. Luang Pu Ginaree praised Luang Pu's dedication to practice, but in his laconic way, warned him of the distractions that might arise with his gift for expounding the Dhamma. "Venerable Cha, everything in your practice is fine, but be wary of giving talks.